Hi, it's Amy from Cakes with Faces and welcome back to my series about different types of Japanese food. We've been looking at how they were invented and also how they compare to the versions we get abroad. So far in the series we've had katsu curry and sushi, and today is all about ramen. It's one of the most well-known and most loved types of Japanese food. But it turns out it wasn't originally from Japan. And at one point, people were arrested just for selling ramen. It's all coming up. If you want to watch the other videos in this series, they're in a playlist on my channel. And subscribe if you want to catch my new videos about Japan every other Thursday. So, ramen isn't traditionally Japanese food. It originally came from China. There are quite a lot of different stories about how it was brought to Japan, and like most types of food, there are loads of different restaurants that claim that they were the first place that ever served it. But it's generally thought that it was brought to Japan by people who moved there from China in the late 1800s or early 1900s. That's about the same sort of time the largest Chinatown in Japan was built, in Yokohama, which is where I went to the Ramen Museum. It's not really much of a museum, it's more a collection of restaurants selling regional ramen from different areas around Japan. So it's a good place to go if you want to eat a lot of ramen. They serve mini bowls so you can try lots of different types, although they're not really that mini, they are quite big. And the whole place is decorated in Showa era retro style. Originally, it wasn't called ramen, it was called Shina soba. Shina meant China, and soba really means buckwheat noodles, but it was used for any type of noodles, so China noodles. The word Shina over time became to sound a bit offensive, so that was dropped, and people started calling it ramen. Now, I don't know anything about Chinese pronunciation, so that's probably completely wrong, but la means pulled and mien means noodles, which is quite similar to the Japanese word men, which means noodles. So ramen means pulled noodles, ramen, ramen. Ramen didn't really become popular until the 1940s and 50s. Just after World War II ended, there was a really bad rice harvest in Japan. It was terrible, there wasn't enough food to go round, so people had to adapt, and that actually made lasting changes to the way that people ate. In that period, Japan was occupied by the USA. There wasn't enough rice to go round and wheat was cheap, so they brought in wheat flour from abroad to help feed everyone. They tried to encourage people to eat more bread. Now, I wouldn't need any encouragement. I love all types of bread and bakery products, but at the time, bread wasn't really a big part of the Japanese diet. Later on, there were even American kitchen buses that went around Japan teaching people how to use flour and how to make bread. Ultimately, it didn't really catch on because people didn't tend to have ovens in their small kitchens at home, so they didn't really have anywhere to bake the bread. But people did use the wheat flour to make ramen noodles. Because of the food shortages, there was rationing, but it really wasn't going very well and people didn't have enough to eat. So there were lots of underground black market food stalls. Many of them were ramen stands. People used the flour that was being imported to make noodles for their underground ramen. Lots of them were controlled by the Yakuza. Some of these black markets were in places that we still know today. One of them was in Ameyokocho in Ueno, which is still a market today, and another one was in the Golden Guy, which now has a lot of bars, but it still has kind of an underground feel with all those alleyways. Because there wasn't enough food to go around, it was illegal to run any kind of food stall, so lots of people were arrested for their underground ramen stands. Then, when rationing finished, when the food shortages were over, lots of people started up their own businesses running ramen stalls as a way to make money. Then after the war, lots of soldiers came home to Japan from China, where they developed a taste for ramen and got that ramen addiction. Now, ramen broth is richer and stronger than most Japanese soups and stocks, which tend to be more light and delicate. And it also contains meat, whereas most traditional Japanese cuisine was more about fish. So people said that ramen was stamina food, which helps you grow big and strong. And it is very satisfying. Now, all these things meant that ramen became more popular in Japan and turned it from something that was cheap to eat when there was nothing else to an everyday staple food that everyone loved. Next, regional varieties. Now at first, I never realised there was more than one type of ramen. When it's on the menu in restaurants in the UK, often it's just ramen and that's it. But there's actually so many different types, and lots of them are regional. There's Hakata tonkotsu ramen from Fukuoka, which has a really creamy, rich broth made from boiling pork bones. It was actually invented by mistake when the chef overboiled the broth by accident and noticed it had turned really white and milky, and they liked it, and that's how tonkotsu ramen was invented. The pork bones are boiled for up to 12 hours, sometimes even longer. In northern Japan, there's miso ramen. Again, there's lots of different stories about how it was invented. I kind of like the rumour that it was made when a drunk customer demanded the chef put noodles in their miso soup. But another story says it was invented in Hokkaido by a chef who wanted to make a healthier version of ramen, so they used miso for the flavouring instead of oily meat and fat. However, another chef in Sapporo took that healthy miso ramen and made their own regional version by adding butter as a topping. As well as flavouring, the butter melts on the surface of the ramen and helps keep it warm in the freezing cold temperatures, which does make sense. It's so cold in Hokkaido that when I was there, my snacks got cold really quickly. Now let's take a look at ramen abroad and whether it's the same as ramen in Japan. Obviously, I can't speak for all countries, so I'm going to take the UK as an example. The first place that I had ramen was at Wagamama. Tell me in the comments where you first tried it. At the time, Wagamama only had one vegetarian ramen dish, but now they've got quite a few different types. Let's have a look at the menu. There's basic chicken ramen, which is fairly traditional Japanese. The broth's made with miso. But not all of them are very authentic. There's ramen with chili, coriander and teriyaki sauce, which you don't really find in ramen in Japan. Apart from some regional varieties, ramen in Japan doesn't tend to be very spicy, although you do get curry ramen, which is a crossover between curry rice and ramen. But in general, traditional Japanese cooking doesn't really use chilies and it's not very spicy. And it is worth remembering that Wagamama isn't really a Japanese restaurant. It's Pan-Asian, so there's lots of crossovers and they put their own spin on dishes. They're not trying to be traditionally Japanese. I do like Wagamama. The food's fresh and tastes really good, but what puts me off going there more often is the price. The ramen dishes are between £10.70 and £14.70, which is a lot more than they would be in Japan, where ramen's often only a few hundred yen. Ramen is always quite expensive in the UK. Restaurants here are across the board much more expensive than in Japan, and Japanese restaurants in particular always tend to be quite high end, so they're going to be on the pricier end of the scale. But in Japan, ramen is actually quite a cheap food. It was developed to be cheap when all that flour was imported to feed everyone cheaply when there were food shortages. And I've heard there's a kind of unwritten rule around ramen restaurants in Japan where everyone tries to keep their prices below 1,000 yen. Another difference in Japan is that ramen restaurants only serve ramen. They tend to be quite small with just a couple of seats along the counter. The chef has their own special recipe for the broth, and they only serve a handful of different dishes. Whereas in the UK, it's common to see ramen alongside sushi, katsu curry, and all types of Japanese food. They also have ramen at Yo Sushi, another popular chain in the UK. The shiitake mushroom ramen looks quite similar to ramen in Japan, although veggie ramen isn't that common. You can find it, but you have to go to specialist places. Your average ramen bar on the street will only have meat or fish-based ramen. There's spicy seafood ramen, which has a hot and spicy kimchi broth that looks more Korean than Japanese. You tend to find hot and spicy broth elsewhere in Asia. And the chicken curry ramen has fried chicken in it. You do find curry ramen in Japan, and there's karaage fried chicken in batter, but it wouldn't usually be served in the ramen like this. Now, what about ramen to cook yourself at home? Aside from instant ramen, which really is a whole different type of food, it's not really anything like the ramen you get cooked fresh. There are kits to make your own ramen at home if you don't have time to boil pork bones for 12 hours. Honestly, I haven't been that impressed with ramen kits I bought from the supermarket in the UK. Most of them don't really have the flavour you want. During the lockdowns, I tried out quite a few of these because I just wanted some ramen when the restaurants were shut. And maybe it's obvious, but I found the ones from Japan to be a lot better than the ones from the supermarket. You can buy them online at Japanese grocery stores like Starry Mart or Asian Cook Shop. Here's some of my favourites. Daisho Hakata ramen. This one's tonkotsu style. It has a really good flavour, a bit creamy. I like the yellow one best and the red one's good too. Itsuki have a range of different types of regional ramen. Lots of them are vegetarian. I think they're also vegan, so you can try different types. Their yuzu ramen's really good. It's got a light flavour of citrus and soy sauce. And samurai ramen. No animal, no fish, no MSG, no alcohol. This one has a sesame flavour. You cook up whatever toppings you want, some meat or fish, a boiled egg, some vegetables. The noodles only take about 2 minutes to cook in boiling water, and then you just add in the flavouring powder or the sachet of flavouring oil, which sounds really simple. I don't know how they make it taste so good. Sometimes these kits can be a bit pricey because they are imported from Japan, but if you shop around you can find them at a reasonable price for a meal. I also like this shichimi togarashi, sometimes it's called nanami togarashi, which you shake on top of your ramen to make it more spicy. It's chili pepper and sesame. Sometimes you see this exact same one in ramen restaurants in Japan. And in Japan, there are so many good ramen shops. My favourite is Tea's Tantan. I love their golden sesame ramen. I really want to try everything on the menu, but I always want to have my favourites as well. But rather than sticking to recommended places or chains that you've heard of like Ichiran, I'd really recommend just popping into any small ramen bar that you come across and you might make your own discovery. Especially in cities like Tokyo, there really are hundreds of ramen restaurants, so places have to be good to get enough business to stay open. So the standard is excellent across the board. You can't go too far wrong. And if you do, it's a story. I love watching videos about people who own tiny ramen bars in Japan. They work such long hours and work so hard, perfecting their craft to make the perfect bowl of ramen, all just to make their customers happy. So tell me your favourite ramen place in the comments and tell me what ramen's like in your country. And if you've got any suggestions for other types of food you'd like to see in this series, tell me in the comments. And I'll see you not next week, but the week after on Thursday. Bye bye.